Good evening, everybody. Hello, Mary. It's nice to have you
Hello.
with us tonight. For those of you who have joined us tonight, we are going to speak to Mary Kouyoumdjian, who is a brilliant young composer, among other things, of Armenian descent, who is based in New York. And I have had the privilege of knowing Mary for probably over 12 years. Maybe you remember better. I don't remember much.
Not that long.
Yes, it was, I think, around 2008 or 9 that we met. And I'm very, very happy to know you. I'm very proud of you as a fellow Armenian, as well as a woman, as well as a human being, because you are also a wonderful person and a great friend.
This is such a nice introduction already. Thank you.
Considering that I haven't prepared anything, and I think it is fair that I mentioned that tonight's interview is going to be very informal, because I don't think that in music formalities are necessary, and also because I know you so well, and because I I reserve the right to think that I know quite a lot about your work as well, because I have been following it throughout the years. So Mary is the second person we are interviewing this year within the framework of Women's Musical Month, which takes place from the 8th of March until the 7th of April, during which we celebrate the legacy of Armenian women, musicians, be it composers or performers. And obviously, we could not include Mary. And without any further, delay, why don't I, Mary, just, ask you to give us a short introduction as you see yourself, and then I will obviously add other stuff to the introduction, if that's okay.
Sure, of course. Well, first, thank you so much for having me as being a part of your celebration of women artists. I'm so honored. And thank you to everyone who's here as well. I'm looking forward to chatting with you and answering any questions as we continue to discuss. A little bit about me. I was born in the United States. I was born in California to parents who are refugees of the Lebanese Civil War. And my grandparents, of course, came from Armenia and had gone through the Armenian Genocide. And this experience of both the Armenian Genocide and the Lebanese Civil War have very much influenced my compositions and the reason why I choose to write and choose to express through music. So a lot of the work that I do involves some kind of documentary aspect to it, in which social and political issues around Armenia, Lebanon, surrounding regions, diaspora, that these topics are explored. And oftentimes I'm exploring these topics through interviews, through field recordings, so that people who have experienced them firsthand can speak with audiences about things that they have gone through. And I think actually, Hasmik, the first time I met you in person was my first trip to Armenia about 10 years ago, and which was extraordinary because I think we had been chatting for quite a while, and then I finally got to meet you in person, and you showed me like all that Yerevan had to offer with music and concerts and art. And I remember on that trip I took so many field recordings. I was the nerd walking around with my handheld recorder trying to gather as many sounds as I could to use them later in compositions. So creatively, that's me in a nutshell. And then I'm also an arts administrator. I run a conference for contemporary music called New Music Gathering, where we go around the United States every year. Well, in normal times when we don't have a large global pandemic, we go around the country and support the creation of new music and new art. And I'm also an educator. I teach at Columbia University, the New School, and Brooklyn College here in New York.
As well as you're still studying.
And I am finishing my doctorate in this next month at Columbia University. I was just telling Hasmik a little bit before this started, I'm finishing my dissertation on creating as part of the Armenian diaspora and what that means. So yeah, there's a lot going on.
Well, maybe that will take us to Silent Cranes, because I will never forget the premiere of that here in Yerevan when the Kronos Quartet performed that, and I think that probably to date will be one of the most beautiful pieces of music I've ever heard. And it was so beautifully visually done at the opera with the audio visual installation. Um, I mean, I think, because I, as a person who established music over me in London, and then when I came to Armenia and I did concerts here or projects, I felt incredibly happy and privileged to be able to do it in my homeland. So I can only imagine what you felt when you premiered something as beautiful and deeply personal as Silent Cranes in Armenia. And I was sitting right there next to you. I remember that day. Why don't you share that experience with us? Tell us a bit about the collaboration with the Kronos Quartet, the Silent Cranes, and the premiere. And then after that, perhaps we can just go ahead and play that piece of music for the audience.
Of course, yeah. And I will say, you were such a wonderful person to sit next to during that premiere for a number of reasons, for this coming together after having met you so many years before, but also because when people, you know, if you ever go to a concert and people are talking, you want Hasnik to sit next to you because you were shushing anybody who was talking through that piece. But anywho, I digress. So that piece, Silent Cranes, is very special to me. And I know that as composers, we're not supposed to pick favorites. It's like picking your favorite child, but it is my favorite piece that I've written. And I think it is and holds a special place in my heart because it embodied so much of just identity and heritage and experience of family and our ancestors, and in a way that felt like a small attempt to honor those experiences. And basically how that project had happened was I had collaborated with the Kronos Quartet before on a piece called Bombs of Beirut. And they had commissioned me to write a new work, and we're hoping to go to Armenia soon in the future. So they commissioned me to write a piece for this 100th anniversary of the Armenian Genocide in 2015. And I really wanted to integrate interviews from survivors. I think it's not often that we actually get to hear those experiences from the people who have experienced them. Mm-hmm. So I licensed a whole bunch of recordings, both in English and in Armenia, and in Armenian, of people who had gone through the genocide, sharing what they had gone through. And those testimonies are part of an electronic track. So if you go to the concert experience, you see the string quartet on stage, but through the speakers, you hear the testimonies of these survivors. And along with those testimonies were also recordings of Gomiras and his student, recorded in 1912 in Paris, as well as singer Isabel Panosian, who had recorded Grunk closer to me in Harlem, New York in 1916. So these old recordings that, especially Gomiras's, I think is so extraordinary that it survived all this time, accompany these stories. And the experience of bringing it to Armenia was so special. My music had never, I don't think had ever been played in Armenia before. And it's a very strange thing to live so far away from your ancestral homeland and to not have a physical connection to the land, and to have my music connected to it in some way. Just, I can't describe it. And I also can't describe the experience of being in that concert hall, of being in the opera house, because you and I had gone to that opera house the last time I had visited Armenia, and I never would have thought that my music would have been played there, and for the community who I think of so often in my work. So it was just really special, and the piece continues to have a life. I just found out actually yesterday that Carnegie Hall is having their first virtual festival. They still haven't quite opened their doors here in New York. And on April 24th, they're presenting an excerpt of Silent Cranes with Kronos Quartet too. So it continues to live. And
absolutely wonderful. Yes, it's just spreading its wings like a silent crane around the world.
Yes. Yeah.
But just if I may also share my experience from that day, you're right, actually. We did go to the Opera House a year before that, where you met Tigran Mansourian and Edward Mizrayan, I believe, and I took photos of you. So, I mean, at that point, I wasn't based in Armenia either, so it was very special for me also. As well as on the day of your premiere, I still wasn't living in Armenia, so that was also very special for me, because as a diasporan Armenian, just like you, to be able to go back to your homeland and experience something as beautiful as that, it meant a lot to me. Because I think it's our little way of being able to do something for the country or for our people. It's our, well, I don't know whether it's little, because what you're doing is actually very, very, very big. And we will continue talking about your work in greater detail as we, continue with the interview. But perhaps we should go ahead and play Silent Cranes, I think, so that people can imagine how beautiful it is and we're talking about. But it is fair that we should say this is not the exact version of it, right?
Yes, and if I can give a quick little introduction for what you are about to hear. This is a large 30-minute work, and the excerpt that you will see is it's sort of like giving away the end, like reading the last page of the book before you start it. It's the last movement, and in this movement and the electronic track, you'll hear this recording by Zabel Panosian, made in 1916 in Harlem, of her interpretation of Gurung. It's not the same version that we know of Gomidas. It's not the same melody that we have adopted as this anthem in remembering the genocide. It's her own interpretation. And there's also speech, and the speech is spoken by David Barsamian, who's an investigative journalist, who has been very dedicated to talking about Armenian politics and social conflicts, whose mother had gone through the genocide, and he also has been very dedicated in recording testimonies of genocide survivors, of the ones now obviously have mostly passed, but in the 80s and 90s he was doing quite a lot of recording. And I asked him just a very simple question, which is, why is it important to talk about the Armenian genocide 100 years later? And the text that he recites is his response to that question.
Oh, that's wonderful.
A century is a long time. It is and it isn't. The lost child of Bitlis cries out, Mairig, Mairig, Ures, Minagem Gavachnam. Mother, mother, where are you? I am alone and afraid.
Young ladies and girls.
Those who control the present control the past, and those who control the past control the future. Orwell. Those who do not remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Santayana. The struggle of humankind against power is the struggle of memory against forgetting. The assassination of Allende quickly covered over the memory of the Russian invasion of Czechoslovakia. The bloody massacre in Bangladesh caused Allende to be forgotten. The din of war in the Sinai drowned out the groans of Bangladesh. The massacres in Cambodia caused the Sinai to be forgotten. And so on and on and on, until everyone has completely forgotten everything. Kundera. Who speaks today of the annihilation of the Armenians? Hitler. Yergir, homeland, water so clean, air so pure, fruits and vegetables so tasty. So survivors of the genocide told me, maybe with some exaggeration. Yergir, a magical place full of wonder and cruelties.
When we went out of our camp, it was all these bodies in the mud, you know.
Turkey, a crime
Some
scene.
of them were
No more Enver and Talat statues and streets. No more pretending it didn't happen. No more macho posturing. Liberate yourselves from twisted and toxic nationalist narratives. Ambassador Morgenthau, where are the Armenians heading? Talat. Their destination is the abyss. We, the keepers of memories and dreams, keep coming up like weeds to remind you and ourselves of the past. A faded but dear landscape drenched in blood, the burning of books and churches. We live in their ashes and beyond them. Against the ruin of the world, there is only one defense, the creative act, Rexroth. Let us play again in our gardens and fields and glory in the beauty of the flowers forever. A century is a long time. It is and it isn't. Why do I feel it is important to talk about the Armenian genocide 100 years later? It's important to complete the poems and eat the last pieces of lavash and bastev. Our grandparents are singing. Let's finish their songs.
That was so mesmerizing. It's just so hard to come back to reality after that. And if I might say, that video doesn't even do any justice to what the real thing is, especially when you're sitting at the opera and you have this huge screen before you and the visual images are moving and you can hear the sound even better. It just gets under your skin and you just have goosebumps. And I remember exactly how I felt that day, you know, back in, what was this, 2015? Do you remember?
2015, yeah, just, well, the week of the centennial, yeah.
Well, we have a comment here from Silva. She says that it was absolutely beautiful, and I'm not surprised. She's a lover of
Thank
music.
you, Silva.
Right, Mary. So, so basically, if anything, we should be able to hear perhaps a longer version, a fuller version of this on 24th of April, right? Do I understand correctly?
I think that on the 24th, it may just be this excerpt because this is the only video that we currently have, like a completed video. We are hoping to record it professionally and hopefully release this recording soon. That's been a dream of mine, to release Silent Cranes on an album. But yeah, if you'd like to watch it again, come on over. Carnegie Hall is showing it for free on the 24th, as well as a whole bunch of other wonderful pieces that are all with the intent of hopefully inspiring a little bit of hope in this time, which has been so difficult for all of us.
You just mentioned the Carnegie Hall, which reminds me, or not reminds me, but which I think it's only fair that I mentioned that your music has been performed in so many countries and in so many wonderful cultural centers, such as the Carnegie Hall and the Barbican in London, and so on and so on. So we will speak about your career and your success to date. However, what I think we mustn't forget about is also how it all started, because surely, or perhaps it was that way, But surely you didn't just arrive at composing one day. Did you play an instrument? Was it a dream of yours? Did you prefer being a musician, and then all of a sudden you discovered a hidden talent? How did it all start, and when did it all start?
Sure. Oh, I have had such like a rocky relationship with music making. I started when I was 5 taking piano lessons in our neighborhood shopping mall, just in a music store. It was like across from the McDonald's, basically. So I'd take my piano lessons and then I'd go get my chicken McNuggets after as a little treat for having done it. But it was something that I think I was good at, but I didn't fully enjoy growing up. And I think a lot of that had to do with eventually becoming a little more serious about piano and moving into classical music. And with classical piano, there are a lot of competitions that one enters, and this idea of being competitive in music making just never really appealed to me. So I wasn't taking it as seriously as I perhaps wanted to. And then I started studying jazz. I moved away from classical music, and my jazz teacher did not believe in competitions, which was so liberating. And jazz is essentially composition. You were improvising and composing on the spot. And as I was studying jazz, I saw the movie Rudy, which is a very dated underdog football movie, where actually the coach in the movie is Armenian, if we want to bring it all back to that. But anyway, I had seen this film and it had a beautiful score by Jerry Goldsmith, and I thought, oh my gosh, I could write music for film. This is what I can do. So I went to college, to UC San Diego and to New York University to study film scoring, and then moved to LA and did film music for a few years. And what I realized was that it can be very difficult as like a non-male artist, as a woman or non-binary artist in classical music, but in film music, it absolutely is. It's such a boys' club. And I found that being in my mid-20s, working in post-production in film just wasn't a healthy environment at all. So I moved back to New York, and thought, I want to do concert music. I can be my own creative director if I'm doing concert music. I have control of my career. I don't have to answer to a team of men. I can do whatever I want. So I moved to New York in 2010. I started a new music ensemble that played a whole bunch of contemporary music, but also was a group that could play my own music, and ran that for several years. And that allowed me access to recordings and performances that would then get noticed by other ensembles and presenting organizations, and things started to snowball from there, with a lot of work, obviously, and advocating for oneself. But I've been here since and have just loved working in this medium.
Well, this is a bit ironic because you just mentioned about men deciding the career paths that women take just because of the world or the way the world goes, and just because they are men. And perhaps it is that reason why it is more so important for us to celebrate female musicians and composers, because they are none less important or talented. But let's not dwell on that, because I think it is ultimately their loss whenever they don't get to collaborate with us or benefit from our projects.
Well, but may I say something to? Obviously, I don't want to speak on gender very much, because the last thing we want to do is really point it out in a way. But I've been thinking a lot about gender as far as Armenian music goes, and why perhaps it is that so much of Armenian music does just historically celebrate male voices. And this might just be my dissertation talking, but all these ideas are so fresh in my head. But I think that because our artistic community has such a responsibility to preserve music of our past, because so much of it has been at risk of being lost, that has meant a lot of valid celebration, but a lot of our energy is gone towards these composers of our past who have been men, that historically have not been women. And I think oftentimes this means that new art making is compromised. And when new art making is compromised, ultimately that means that the voices of women and non-binary composers and performers and artists are also being compromised. So I guess what I'm trying to say is just to advocate for new art being created while also honoring the past, but that there are so many perspectives and voices that I would love to see. Like, it makes me sad that when I think, who are the women composers? Who are the Armenian women composers? That I have to think, who are they? Like, I have to do really hard research to find out. And I know that they're there.
Actually, I think that issue is international. It's not just exclusive to Armenia. But this perhaps brings me back to why it was also so important for me to include you, because you're not just a performer, because we have a lot of female performers in folk or classical or jazz, but we don't have a lot of composers of Armenian descent around the world. And so that's why it is also so important, because you have, I do find you internationally successful, and it is, and you're not just, as I mentioned at the beginning, you're not just the person who composes music. You tackle a lot of social issues, global issues for your music, related to your roots, your cultural heritage, and I've always had respect for people who, through their art or work, try to benefit the wider public, the general, the communities, not just, they don't do it just for yourself. And that's why I think it is very, very important. But you were mentioning that when you came back to New York, you were able to create a number of projects, or work on a number of projects with an ensemble. Were you talking about Hotel Elephant?
Oh, yes, I was. Yeah. Yeah.
Tell us a bit more, because again, I was there when you were, setting up Hotel Elephant, and it did go on for quite a while successfully. But please do tell us a bit more about that.
Sure. Well, Hotel Elephant still very much exists. I'm no longer involved, which I can go into. Is all nothing bad. They're such a wonderful group. But I had started this group, Hotel Elephant, which is dedicated to the music of living composers, and is made up of, at the time, of about 20 musicians. I think now about 15 musicians. Mm-hmm. And these are all musicians who were essentially my family. Nobody knows my music better than these individuals. I think we both really grew together, and have been performing in New York at Carnegie Hall, at Lincoln Center, at the clubs, in all of these sorts of different places. And I was executive director of this group for about 6 years, and ultimately, around that point, found myself getting spread very thin, both in balancing creativity and composition, and then also balancing what it means to manage a group of 20 people, and what it means to rehearse and realize the works of so many other composers. And had to make a choice, because I felt like the group needed more attention than I could give it, and also my projects needed more attention than I was able to give them. So I chose to leave the group, although that said, we're still so tightly connected, and they still perform so much of my music, and I see members of the group as often as I can, like nearly every day, because they lived in my neighborhood essentially. So I think though, this question of, and it does go back to gender. I think women, we are taught to multitask so much, right? We have to wear all the hats. And I think as I've gotten older, I've learned I don't want to wear all the hats all the time. Sometimes I want to wear this hat and just focus on this hat for a little bit, and then maybe I'll come back to this hat. But right now I just want to focus on this hat of creativity and getting my work out there, because that's really fulfilling for me right now.
Yeah, that's very interesting, because I also wear a few hats.
Yes, you do. You wear many hats.
The music of Armenia, and it is. You're very right. You have to know when to balance what, and what to prioritize at what time. so that nothing suffers, be it you, your own sanity, or be it the project. So that's a very fine balance you have to find and try to maintain. But having said all of that, you are incredibly active almost at all times. It seems like your creative juices never stop flowing, and you're involved in really, really important projects. And one of them was recently you premiered at the Met. Do you want to take it over, or should I give an introduction?
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to talk about it. So I'm so honored and fortunate to have been commissioned by the Metropolitan Museum of Art here in New York. A couple years ago, they had this extraordinary Armenia exhibit, which was the first, at least in the United States, first exhibit of Armenian art that did not belong to an Armenian museum, that was presented by a major institution. And part of that exhibit did include the commissioning of original art by Armenian artists. So I was very lucky to be included in that. And the commission was very open. It was basically anything that I wanted to do, which is just bonkers crazy to think of having that kind of freedom. And it was originally supposed to be part of a portrait concert where this new work, Silent Cranes and Bombs of Beirut, were going to be all performed together. But then COVID happened and it got canceled. It was just scheduled 2 weeks after New York City closed all of the performance venues. So we had to adapt. So we adapted this piece called They Will Take My Island into a virtual medium. And what They Will Take My Island is a collaboration with my longtime inspiration, Adam Kouyoumdjian, who I can't even believe that this worked, because I remember watching Ararat in 2001. I think that's when the film had come out, and thinking, oh, this is my example of a living Armenian artist creating things that are socially relevant to our community, in a beautiful new way of creating new art while honoring the past. And I wrote to him and I said, I don't know if you know me, but I would love to collaborate with you if you'd be interested. And he wrote back enthusiastically. And one of the things that we found that we really connected on was the artist Arshil Gorky. And if you know Adam Kouyoumdjian's work, you know that Arshil Gorky is a huge common thread in a lot of his work. And he has 2 films, both Ararat, which directly addresses Arshil Gorky, and also his short film, A Portrait of Arshil, which is this beautiful home video that he and his wife had made as a letter to their son, explaining his namesake, Arshil, and why he has that name. So what this project ended up being was an integration of excerpts of those 2 films, and also interviews with art historians and family members of Arshil Gorky's, in which they speak about the significance of Gorky's art, biographical information, and the relevancy of his art today. And musically, what's happening along with all of those interviews is a string octet, which is playing material that is very influenced by Armenian folk, that of course integrates gurung, because how could it not? Because this is just our anthem. And it is now a 30-minute work that is available for free through the Metropolitan Museum of Art. If you just Google it on YouTube, the whole thing is there. But we will watch just a short little excerpt of it through this session right now.
I think we have to, after that introduction.
And those are his memories of those paintings, but they're painted with like a blood red, which is kind of the fire, the flames, and also a kind of sooty black. So when you see those paintings, you realize you're in the presence of someone who just found art as a way to channel their pain, channel their emotion, channel their passions.
Gorky is seen holding a bunch of small flowers as a fragrant gift to his absent father, the intended recipient of this remarkable photograph. The artist and his mother is not simply a painted version of a photograph. The differences underline the expressive elements that make this piece such a powerful work of art. Gorky's homage to his mother was bound to take on sacred quality. His experience as a survivor of the Armenian genocide is at the root of its spiritual power. With this painting, Gorky had saved his mother from oblivion, snatching her out of a pile of corpses to place her on a pedestal of life.
This is his mother who died in the genocide in his arms of starvation, because as a mother, she gave her food to her children first and not her son. She loomed large in his imagination. I mean, he must have had tears streaming down his eyes when he was doing it, because it would have flooded those memories. If I finish this painting, I'll never see her again. I mean, that photograph is incredible, because what we know is that the father has stopped sending money. So they had to find a photographer's studio and dress Gorky up. And remember, so this is a patriarchal world. They don't have Bartush in that photograph. But that photograph says, remember your son. You know, it's about the mother for sure. And she's got that incredible apron that Gorky remembers and paints, you know, the embroidered apron. So that's sort of saying, this is where you're from, this is Armenia. But Gorky, with that sort of flower in his buttonhole, is very smartly dressed, almost like a Western dress. It's saying, this is your son. Please don't forget us. And it didn't work. So I'm sure every time Gorky looked at that photograph, he must have thought how different our lives would have been if my father had actually sent for us and we could have gone to America before the genocide and escaped it. You can feel it in the paintings. You don't necessarily have to know that story to know there's something going on.
Abruptly, but you know, I think that was just about enough for people to get an idea of the collaboration and of the music of the kind of music that you compose, or some of your work, because your work is so extensive, right? And perhaps this will bring me to my next question. What is next for you?
This question, yes. Well, you know, speaking of Adam Agoyan, what's next for me is an opera adaptation of one of his films. Wow. He has this beautiful film called Adoration, which is, I never know quite how to describe the plot, because if you know Adam Agoyan films, they're like so complex with so many different characters, and there's relationships. But essentially, it's a film about a high school boy who his parents had passed away, and he has a school assignment where he's asked to appropriate a real life news story, like in our real world news story, of an attempted terrorist attack. Wow. In which a husband plants a bomb on his wife while flying overseas, and he convinces his class that this story is actually about his parents and how they died. And it's very dramatic, obviously, so it makes for a really good opera, but it really brings up these notions of racism and like fear of terrorism and bigotry and these larger social issues. So I'm working with a really wonderful librettist, Royce Vavrick, who has adapted the screenplay into this opera, and will be writing this for the next couple of years. And it'll be premiered here in New York through the Prototype Festival with Beth Morrison Projects, which is an opera company here very dedicated to presenting contemporary opera. So that, and then also for the past 5 years, I've been working on a project called Paper Pianos, which is also a large documentary project, an evening-length documentary about the refugee crisis. And the primary story of this piece is I met a really extraordinary pianist, Milad Yusufi from Afghanistan, who is a refugee and moved to New York. And he shared his story of growing up in Kabul and not being able to play music because the Taliban had forbidden music and art making. So he taught himself how to play piano by drawing keys on a piece of paper and silently practicing. So this piece integrates his story of what it was like back in Kabul and what it's like here in New York, and it's supplemented by interviews with other refugees and resettlement workers talking about what the process is like coming to the United States. And that premieres next season with this wonderful group, Alarm Will Sound, which is like a small orchestra essentially, and there will be staging and projection art by Kevwork Murad, who's a wonderful Syrian Armenian artist, who also, I always feel like I'm such a good advertiser of his artwork because this right here is one of his pieces. That's a painting by Kevwork. So he's also very dedicated to creating films and stories about displaced peoples. So we're all working together to tell this story together.
And once again, you are tackling a very important issue to many people, and that sounds like a very sensitive story. Imagine not being able to play or perform music. I don't want to imagine that because it would be the ultimate punishment. Why don't we, I think because we still have some time left, I'm just going to go ahead and ask if anybody has any questions for Mary, because I have been asking all the questions. Talking. Does anybody have any questions that they would like to ask? Let's see if anybody has any questions.
Should they turn on their microphones, or can they put?
Well, they can either send us messages through chat, or yes, they can turn on their microphones and we should be able to hear them, but it seems like nobody has a question.
That's okay. I talked a lot. I probably answered more than you even wanted to know.
Well, I was just thinking that it has been quite an extensive interview. We did manage to cover quite a lot. I mean, obviously, we will not be able to cover everything you've ever done because, as I mentioned, you're so busy and you do so much studying, teaching, performing, composing, and, well, not performing, but premiering your artwork. But is there anything else that you would like to add that perhaps I haven't mentioned and you think it is important, be it from your past or from your present or from your future?
Yeah, I suppose just a couple small things. You know, you had mentioned that when I was speaking of Paper Pianos and Adoration, that the topics are very big and they're difficult. But I think that, you know, our experience as Armenians makes us very empathetic to people around the world who are experiencing or have experienced similar themes of displacement or lack of expression, or not the lack of expression, but the lack of the ability to freely express without consequence. So for me, this is really a no-brainer to write about these kinds of projects. It feels like both a responsibility and honor, a privilege to be able to do that, because if you have the platform to do it, then speak loudly, and speak loudly about issues that are very important and resonant to our times today. And I see a question here.
Yes, I see a question as well from Hannah.
All right.
What is currently inspiring? Go ahead. You go ahead.
Okay. Well, thank you, Hannah. What is currently inspiring you about the future of Armenia and Armenian art? Oh, this is such a great question. I think what's inspiring me right now is that people are speaking out. I think especially in the context of what's been happening politically in Armenia in the past few years, and especially this year with the war in Artsakh, I think that the younger generation has sort of had it, and we have, right? We've had it, and no one can advocate better for Armenian rights and issues than Armenians, and youth will speak very loudly. And I've been so excited to see through social media, through as everyone has their phones and everyone has been sort of quarantined and forced to create their own documentation, to see so much music and art being put out on the internet about these issues that I think perhaps my parents, certainly my grandparents, would have been way too scared to speak out about. So that really excites me quite a lot.
I have another one from Silva.
Okay, so, thank you I won't read your compliments, but thank you. I mean, I'm reading your compliments, but I won't read them out loud. Thank you so much. Do you think we will become more uplifting in the future in our music? Oh, I don't know. I'm not sure that I can speak necessarily to the larger we. I know, for myself, this question comes up a lot of, I don't write uplifting music. My music is very, it's a little heavy, and I think that's probably a balance, because in my life I'm very cheerful, and again, part of the culture is to be resilient and to be optimistic, because you have to carry on. So I think for my music, I'm not sure if it has a road to being more uplifting in the future, but hopefully, I would hope that we're all looking forward to what the future may be. I know certainly here in New York, it's finally spring, and this time of year does make me look forward to the future. It's certainly nice that we're hopefully coming out of this pandemic, that things are hopefully starting to settle in Armenia in some way towards positivity. So I can only hope.
There's one from me as well.
Sure.
When can we expect to see you in Armenia? Do you think you're ready for a new project or for a new collaboration, or just simply to come here and maybe research some music, or explore some more music, maybe with, as you mentioned, the young kids of Armenia?
Yeah, I mean, the answer is as soon as possible. For myself, I just got both doses of my vaccine. I'm ready to hop on a plane as soon as I can. I had already been wanting to go to Armenia and had been planning to spend the summer in Armenia. These past 2 summers had been hoping to do so around dissertation research, around working with kids, around gathering field recordings, just any of it. I think it's been too long. You feel homesick. I start to question my identity the longer I am away from the country, and I'm feeling not entirely myself. And I know that will be completely remedied once I step off the plane and my foot touches the land, and I breathe in the air and see the people. So yeah, as soon as possible, certainly no later than this year. Yes.
Wonderful, and I will be there at the airport to pick you up. Oh, I think we have another. Yes, I think we have another question. I'm not sure if it's a question or. Oh no, there is one.
No, it is. Okay, would you say that your earlier film scoring training influences your writing and concert music? Also, how would you see the role of music in documenting and expressing the unspeakable emotions of disastrous events happened in our history? Oh, Yes. Oh, and I will check out these films. Thank you for the recommendations. Yeah, these are fantastic questions. Thank you. Yes, my earlier experience in film scoring has absolutely influenced my concert music. I mean, quite literally, it is like watching a document. Well, you've seen two examples that have film. Those are sort of extraordinary examples. Most of my music does not have accompanying film with it. But this idea of having a larger narrative that is being underscored and supported by the music is very much influenced from my experience in film music. The idea that the music is constantly serving the text and constantly serving the story is very much there. And then as far as the role of music in documenting and expressing the unspeakable emotions of disastrous events, this is something that I struggle with, because yes, absolutely, music does express the inexpressible. It cuts to your core, it cuts to your heart, to your mind in a way that when there are no words, and there are really no words to describe these events of our history, that hopefully music creates this space for empathy and understanding and reflection. That said, music is, even at its ugliest and most intense and most horrific, is still beautiful. It is still art. Even aggressive, violent art is still beautiful in its own way. So it will never, ever be able to fully represent these moments. But I think that's also okay. Like, it's okay for it to fail. We don't actually want to relive these moments. But I think finding that balance between music having the ability to say what we can't, but also understanding its own limitations is quite important.
Yeah. Well, I think it is fair that we wrap up today's interview, because we've covered it so extensively, and I'm sure if we continue, we would go on for a very, very long time, but we did say it would be about 1 hour.
Sure. Thank you for the great questions, everyone.
The questions are awesome, and why don't we just divert them to your website, that you're on Instagram, you're on Twitter, marykouyoumdjian.com, or just Google her simply to find out more. You can also Google Music Over Armenia, or just go to musicoverarmenia.com. We're also on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, where you can discover wonderful musicians such as Mary and find out more about Women's Musical Month. And Mary, thank you very much for joining us today. It was an absolute pleasure. Just recapping everything we've been through, and as well as what we are going to look forward to. And I cannot wait to welcome you here in Armenia. Hopefully I will also be here, and I can welcome you at the airport.
Thank you. And I do want to say thank you to you and Music of Armenia. From the very beginning, you have been so supportive and always behind my work, and I don't take that lightly. It is not a common occurrence, I think, to have, as I was saying, like it's so special to have an Armenian organization really supporting the creation of new work and new artists of all different trajectories of their careers. So thank you. This is such an honor to chat with you today.
You are very welcome, my dear, and it is an honor to have someone like you on our side. So thank you very much for joining us tonight. And thank you very much for your questions, as well as for thanking us for this interview. And we wish you all a lovely weekend.